where Thomas Markle is still rehabilitating, having begged his daughter publicly for a visit or a phone call. What possible excuse could these two have, Meghan in particular?
Daddy, I have a new boyfriend. And I said, that's really nice. And then the next call was like, he's British. And I said, well, that's really nice. And then eventually the third time around it was like, he's a prince.
Thomas Markle, he's due to turn 80 next year, and as we know, he's not been a well man recently, and indeed it was a brush with death just last year that renewed his plea for reconciliation with his daughter Meghan, or Meg, and her husband Prince Harry.
I called, it doesn't work anymore, and there's no address I can write to, so I have no way of contacting my daughter.
This, of course, was the letter that she wrote to her dad before her and Prince Harry got married.
Markle's father, Thomas Markle, who's issued an emotional plea to his daughter saying he doesn't want to die estranged.
Thomas Markle, her dad, who I'm glad to report is re-finding his voice. So have a look at the bombshell trailer, which has just been released.
Imagine discovering that one of the most famous royal love stories may have hidden a deeply personal secret from the very beginning. What if the smiling bride the world watched wasn't sharing the full story, and the people who knew the truth stayed silent for decades? Meghan's father, Thomas Markle, now says he's ready to reveal what he claims he has carried for years, and his comments have sparked fresh debate. Thomas says he's been mocked, ignored, and pushed aside. Now, 80 years old after surviving both a heart attack and a stroke, he says he has nothing left to protect. That's why he chose to speak publicly and tell his side of the story. He didn't hire attorneys. He didn't launch a social media campaign or announce a paid interview. Instead, he simply sat in front of a camera and shared what he says has weighed on him for years. According to Thomas, Meghan underwent a hysterectomy when she was 19 years old. Supporters and critics quickly focused on one detail. The claim came from her father.
The estrangement between Meghan and her father, you could argue, is something quite minor. It involves paparazzi and the media, two things Meghan Markle is very familiar with.
And I think she's taking advantage of a very weakened man and getting him to say things that you just shouldn't be saying on television.
And Meghan's half-sister as well, with whom she's had this long kind of feud, also fills that gap and speaks. And really, it should be Meghan controlling the narrative on this one.
I guess heartbroken. I'm very upset about it as well, because this is a cruel thing to do to a grandparent.
That Harry and Meghan might end up suing you for something you say, given you know they're very friendly with their lawyers, aren't they?
Well, they can sue me.
You know, I don't know if you know her father. He's a really nice man. And in fact, I've been in touch with him recently. He's doing pretty well. And
that's so wonderful to hear. He is doing well.
His attitude is wonderful. You know, he's
not an anonymous online account or an unnamed source. Thomas points out that he paid for her education, acting classes, and first professional headshots. He drove her to auditions, encouraged her ambitions, and says he has carried this private information for more than 20 years because she asked him to keep it confidential. At the time, he says she trusted him completely. This isn't someone who briefly crossed paths with her or is suddenly chasing attention. This is the man who says he supported her from the beginning. He helped pay for school, acting lessons, and the first headshot that started her career. He drove her to auditions, celebrated every small success.
Because she hasn't spoken to her brother, Thomas Markle, or her sister, Samantha Markle, or her father, Thomas Markle Sr., for something like 6-7 years. Hasn't spoken to them at all. They've been completely cut off.
When Meghan first cut him off, kept speaking to the press and doing interviews with the TV, because A, he was desperate to get through to his daughter and she cut off all his calls, and B, I'm afraid he did probably take payment for some of those interviews. Now, really, anyone as bright as Meghan, she is a formidable, bright woman.
As this was all going on, he then had 2 heart attacks, I think it was, and was admitted to hospital. So his health started to take a big downward turn then. And, you know, they've never spoken to each other again. And in fact, Meghan wrote him this big letter, I think it was that August off the top of my head.
Meghan's relationship with her father really is beyond repair. He's just let her down too many times. There's way too much animosity here.
And because of that, Meghan cut off contact with her dad after she married Harry. He's never met the prince in person, although they did speak on the phone years ago.
And believed in her dream long before the spotlight arrived. He says he protected her confidence for more than 2 decades because she trusted him, and back then, he was simply her father. Then, according to Thomas, everything slowly changed. As Meghan's fame grew, he says he became less and less part of her life. It wasn't sudden. The phone calls became fewer. Birthdays passed quietly, and an emotional distance seemed to grow. He says it felt like the volume on their relationship kept getting lower until eventually there was only silence. His name disappeared from interviews, documentaries, and the carefully crafted story presented to the world. While presenting herself as open, genuine, and relatable to the public, Thomas says the person who knew the earliest parts of her life was quietly being pushed out of the picture. He watched from the sidelines as her public image continued to grow.
About time. Meghan Markle has finally reached out to her father, Thomas Markle, who is fighting for his life in an intensive care unit in a Philippines hospital, having lost a leg via amputation. But we know exactly why Meghan has reached out, and it's got absolutely nothing to do with her concerns for the well-being of Thomas Markle, who she has neglected since 2018 before she married Harry.
There are axe murderers in prison. Their family comes to see them, right? I mean, I'm not an axe murderer. I made one dumb mistake, and I'm never being forgiven for it. And this show that they're on, they talk about compassion. There's no compassion for me. There's no compassion for my family.
Thomas Markle had been so cruel to his daughter that they needed to defend her. When, of course, the absolute opposite. And let's remember that letter was written at the behest of the late Queen and the then Prince Charles as an attempt at reconciliation.
While his own place in her story seemed to disappear, even as she became a duchess, signed major media deals and built a worldwide profile, Thomas says he rarely spoke against her. Whenever people asked about Meghan, he says he defended her, stayed quiet, and kept private matters to himself, even as he felt increasingly cut off from her life. Now, though, he says everything has changed. At 80 years old, after surviving both a heart attack and a stroke, he says he's living alone, while grandchildren he has never met are growing up thousands of miles away. He says he even wrote an emotional letter from his hospital bed, hoping to reconnect. According to Thomas, no reply ever came. Not from Meghan and not from Harry. After years of silence, Thomas now says the reason for keeping everything private has disappeared. He insists he isn't speaking for money or publicity. Instead, he says that what he has carried for more than 20 years should not remain untold. He also claims the story reaches far beyond a single personal medical matter. Now the timeline turns to the days before the royal wedding in May 2018. Thomas says he was recovering in a hospital in Mexico.
The deeply personal letter was handwritten and allegedly sent by the Duchess in the months after her wedding, a wedding her father missed.
Earlier this year, the tabloid newspaper published an article about a handwritten letter that Meghan had sent to her estranged father, Thomas Markle. Harry has accused the paper of editing the letter selectively in an intentionally misleading and destructive way.
Meghan Markle did manage to deliver her precious letter to her stricken hospital-bound father, Thomas Markle, via, believe it or not, the government agents, the US government agents, who I revealed yesterday, had arrived in his hospital room by his bed without any form of permission.
After suffering a heart attack when his phone rang, according to him, it was Meghan calling. He recalls expecting concern or reassurance, the kind of conversation many people would hope for during a family health crisis. But Thomas says the call felt very different. He claims there were no questions about his condition, no comforting words, and no emotional conversation. Instead, he describes the exchange as tense, brief, and unusually distant. Thomas then makes another serious allegation. He says Meghan asked him to destroy medical documents connected to her early adult years. According to his account, she wasn't asking him to store them somewhere safe or keep them private. He says she wanted every record removed. Completely, Thomas adds that the tone of the conversation felt unfamiliar to him, saying he had never heard her speak that way before. According to Thomas, the voice on the other end of the phone didn't sound familiar anymore. He describes it as calm, distant, and carefully prepared, as if every sentence had been decided before the call even began. Then, he says, she delivered the words that stayed with him ever since. No one ever needs to know what happened in that hospital. Until that conversation, Thomas says he kept making excuses for the growing distance between them. He convinced himself it was the pressure of the royal engagement, non-stop media attention, and the demands of a new public life. He remembers thinking, it's not personal, she's just busy, she's overwhelmed. But he says that phone call changed how he viewed everything. To him, it no longer sounded like a simple request for privacy. Instead, he says it felt like an effort to ensure part of the past remained hidden. Then, according to Thomas, the conversation ended. There was no "I love you," no "take care," and no warm goodbye. He says the final words were, "Don't contact me again. If you care about me, you won't." Then the call ended. Thomas recalls sitting quietly on his hospital bed with the phone still in his hand, wondering what had just happened. He questioned whether fear, outside influence, or something else entirely had shaped that conversation, but says he still doesn't know. What he says he does know is that nothing followed. No phone calls, no messages, no invitation to the wedding, only silence. Then, weeks later, a cream-colored envelope arrived at his home. Thomas says he stared at it for nearly an hour before opening it. He immediately recognized the handwriting and noticed there was no return address, only a Los Angeles postmark. Standing outside with the envelope in his hands, he says he felt certain whatever was inside would change everything. Eventually, he opened it. Inside were 7 neatly written pages. According to Thomas, every line looked carefully prepared, without corrections or crossed-out words. He says it didn't feel like a personal letter from a daughter. Instead, he describes it as formal, precise, and thoughtfully constructed, as though every sentence had been planned well in advance. Then, one detail immediately caught his attention. Thomas says she never addressed him as Dad. In fact, he recalls there wasn't even a formal greeting, such as "Dear Thomas." To him, it felt unusually distant. As he continued reading, he says the letter accused him of seeking media attention and violating her privacy. Then, he reached one sentence that made him stop and read it again several times to be certain he had understood it correctly. As Thomas continued reading the letter, one section immediately stood out. He says Meghan accused him of keeping things that no longer belonged to him. At first, he wasn't sure what she meant, but as he reached the middle of the letter, he says the message became unmistakable. According to Thomas, she wrote, "You know which documents I'm referring to. You know what was said in those years. I'm asking you for the last time, destroy them, shred them, burn them if you have to. Don't leave them for someone else to find." To Thomas, those words didn't sound like an ordinary request for privacy. He says they felt much more serious. Deeper in the letter, he recalls another sentence that stayed with him. "There are consequences to holding on to what doesn't belong to you anymore." Thomas says he interpreted that statement as a warning. It wasn't shouted or written with obvious anger, but he believed the meaning was clear. The final page, he recalls, contained no personal farewell, no "love you, Dad," and no signature. Instead, he says it ended with the words, "I am moving forward now. This is the last time I will reach out." He remembers sitting quietly with the 7 pages across his lap while rain fell outside. Rather than destroying anything, Thomas says he gathered every document, placed them inside a fireproof box, locked it, and stored it somewhere secure. According to him, he wasn't trying to harm Meghan. He simply believed those papers represented a part of her history that shouldn't disappear. To understand why Thomas believes those records mattered so much, he says you have to go back to the summer of 2000. According to his account, Meghan was 19 years old and home in California during a break from Northwestern University when he noticed she wasn't herself. He recalls months of fatigue, severe cramping, and ongoing pain that didn't seem to improve. At first, they believed it could be stress, school pressure, or adjusting to life away from home. But Thomas says the symptoms continued until doctors suggested further medical evaluation. He says Meghan became frightened and wanted the situation kept private. According to Thomas, she asked him, "Don't tell Samantha. Don't make this a big deal. Just help me get through this quietly." He says he agreed and personally covered the expenses, explaining that he paid in cash because he simply wanted to support his daughter through a difficult time. Thomas also describes the clinic as a small private facility in West Hollywood. He claims Meghan was registered under the name Patient 1472 without a surname or identifying family connection, only a number assigned to her file. According to Thomas, he arrived at the clinic expecting to pick Meghan up after her appointment. As he walked down the hallway, he says something immediately caught his attention. Meghan wasn't by herself. Standing beside her was a woman he says he had never seen before, with short, dark hair, designer sunglasses, and one hand resting firmly on Meghan's shoulder. Thomas initially assumed she worked at the clinic, but he says Meghan's reaction surprised him. He recalls that when she noticed him, her expression wasn't one of relief or exhaustion. Instead, he describes it as panic, as though his arrival had caught her completely off guard. According to Thomas, no one spoke. The unidentified woman looked away, and the three of them continued through the hallway without any explanation. Weeks later, Thomas says he learned who the woman was. He describes her only as someone connected to Meghan's early years in Hollywood. He says he has chosen not to reveal her identity publicly, explaining that, in his view, she remains active today and knows exactly what happened at the clinic. Then, Thomas points to another detail he believes has received little attention. He says that while standing in the hallway, he reached for his phone, intending to call Samantha with a brief update. According to his account, he accidentally opened the camera instead of placing the call. He claims he didn't realize it until days later when he looked through his photo gallery and found a blurry image. Thomas says the accidental photograph appeared to show Meghan, the unidentified woman beside her, and a nurse farther down the hallway looking in their direction. He says the image included a date and timestamp that, in his view, placed Meghan at that clinic on that day. Although he insists the picture was taken by mistake, he says he decided to keep it. Thomas then shifts to another chapter of Meghan's life, long before Prince Harry entered the picture. Before the royal family and worldwide attention, there was Trevor Engelson, a film producer building his career in Hollywood. According to Thomas, Meghan and Trevor shared a genuine relationship. He recalls Trevor frequently visiting the Markle family home, bringing wine, watching movies with everyone, and addressing him respectfully. After being together for nearly a decade, Meghan and Trevor married in 2011. Thomas says Trevor had become deeply woven into the family's life, making what happened afterward especially difficult for him to understand. According to Thomas, just 2 years after the wedding, the marriage came to an end. He says it wasn't marked by a public argument or dramatic confrontation. Instead, he recalls that one morning, Trevor opened an envelope waiting at his apartment. According to Thomas, when Trevor opened the envelope, both wedding rings were inside. There was no note, no phone call, and no explanation, just the rings. Later, through a mutual friend, Thomas says a single word was passed along: closure, nothing more. Thomas has long believed Trevor may have known about Meghan's reported medical history. He says that belief isn't based on a direct conversation between them, but on an incident early in Meghan and Trevor's relationship. According to Thomas, Trevor allegedly found a medical referral letter addressed to Meghan under a different name and mailed to a Beverly Hills post office box. Rather than confronting Meghan, Thomas says Trevor quietly approached him with one question: "Is Meg okay?" He then added, "I just want to make sure she's being honest with herself." Thomas says those words stayed with him and were never forgotten. As Meghan's public profile grew into global fame, Thomas says media organizations repeatedly tried to contact Trevor. They wanted his version of events, his memories of Meghan before the royal family, major media deals, and worldwide attention. According to Thomas, Trevor declined every opportunity. He gave no interviews, offered no anonymous comments, and never hinted at private details. Many people viewed that silence as dignity and restraint. Thomas, however, believes there was another reason behind it. He then recalls an event years later at Trevor's own wedding reception. Near the end of the evening, Trevor reportedly gave a speech and said, "There are things I'll take to the grave, but tonight isn't about silence. It's about finally breathing again." Thomas says people present noticed the emotion in Trevor's voice. In his opinion, those words suggested someone finally letting go of a burden that had never truly belonged to him. Thomas then turns to Samantha, saying she sensed something unusual before anyone else. According to his account, Meghan suddenly disappeared from family contact for nearly 3 weeks that summer. There were no phone calls, visits, or updates. While others assumed she was simply taking time for herself after school, Samantha reportedly felt something wasn't right. Thomas says she questioned him directly, and he responded only that Meghan was dealing with something personal and asked her not to get involved. According to his account, Samantha decided to investigate anyway. He says she drove to a small private women's clinic on a quiet street after hearing him casually mention the location. Thomas describes the building as plain, without a visible name outside. He says Samantha walked in calmly, pretending she was asking about a consultation. Then, according to his story, she noticed a file resting on the reception counter. The name on it immediately caught her attention. It wasn't Markle or Meghan. Instead, Thomas says it read M. Grant, a name he claims Meghan once used in online chat rooms when they were teenagers. According to Thomas's account, the name on that file immediately stood out. He says it was a private nickname shared between the sisters, something he believes had no obvious reason to appear on medical paperwork at a clinic Meghan had never publicly discussed. Thomas says Samantha quietly left the building without asking any questions. She drove home and kept everything to herself. That evening, she tried calling Thomas, but he didn't answer. She called again the next day, then again the day after that. According to Thomas, 4 days later, he finally returned the call, sounding emotionally exhausted, as though he had been carrying an overwhelming burden. He says his response was brief. "She's okay. Don't bring it up. She doesn't want anyone to know." According to Thomas, that moment created a divide within the family. Some believed the matter should remain private, while others struggled to ignore it. He says Samantha fell into the second group. Weeks later, during a quiet family dinner, Thomas says Samantha spoke privately with Meghan. According to his account, she told Meghan she had seen the file. Thomas says Samantha has consistently recalled Meghan's reply. According to her account, Meghan looked directly at her and said, "Then you also know why I can't afford to be like everyone else." Samantha has described the response as calm and measured, rather than emotional or defensive. To her, it sounded like someone who had already accepted a difficult decision long before that conversation took place. Thomas says Samantha has never changed that account. Despite years of public disagreement and criticism, he believes something significant happened that summer and argues the silence surrounding it was intentional rather than accidental. He claims that, over time, a wall of secrecy formed around the situation, with each person choosing either to protect the matter or question it. Thomas then turns his attention to the clinic itself, saying this is where, in his opinion, the story becomes even more unusual. He identifies it as La Fuente Women's Wellness Center, describing it as a small, highly private facility that reportedly served well-known Hollywood clients, including actresses, executives, and their families. According to Thomas, employees were expected to maintain strict confidentiality and avoid discussing who visited the clinic or what took place there. He says privacy wasn't simply a workplace policy, but one of the clinic's defining features. According to his account, it operated quietly for years without attracting much public attention or controversy. Then, he says, reporters began asking questions. Thomas claims that when journalists started investigating the clinic in 2024, they believed they had uncovered something far different from what they expected to find at an ordinary medical facility. According to Thomas, the clinic became even more difficult to approach over time. He describes private security at the entrance, heavily tinted windows, and warning signs stating that unauthorized visitors were not welcome. He says one reporter simply asked about a patient from the early 2000s, and staff allegedly responded by threatening to call the police. Thomas also claims another journalist tried a different method by sending 4 separate emails while posing as someone seeking routine medical services. According to his account, none of the messages received a response, not even an automated acknowledgement. He says the situation became even more unusual in 2025 when the clinic announced what it described as a strategic restructure. According to Thomas, it wasn't presented as a closure or shutdown, but as an internal reorganization. He further claims that during the process, patient records were transferred to a private offshore server in Switzerland, making them unavailable through the usual channels. Thomas says that raised an obvious question in his mind. Why would a small Hollywood wellness clinic move its records overseas? He explains that years before journalists became interested, he had already submitted a formal request, not to expose anyone, but simply to verify his own recollection. According to Thomas, the only response he received stated, "We cannot confirm nor deny the presence of this individual in our facility at any time." He then introduces another person connected to the story, a former nurse he refers to as Marina. Thomas says she worked overnight shifts at the clinic for 5 years, primarily assisting with post-operative care. He also claims she later left California. According to Thomas, a private conversation with Marina was recorded, but never publicly released. He says she stated, "Yes, Meghan was here. She was young, scared, and she left with more than just a scar." Thomas says that when Marina was asked to explain further, she declined to continue. He also claims he spoke with her personally in 2023. According to his account, Marina remembered Meghan clearly and described her as quiet, anxious, and withdrawn in a way that remained memorable to the clinic staff. Thomas says Marina also mentioned one final detail that, in his view, had never surfaced before. According to Thomas, the person who collected Meghan after the appointment was not a member of her family. He claims that individual escorted her through a side exit, and according to Marina's account, they left without signing in, answering questions, or drawing attention before quietly disappearing. According to Thomas's account, the story leaves behind a series of unanswered questions, a clinic that declines to comment, a former nurse who says very little, medical records that he claims were moved overseas, and memories that, in his view, all trace back to one 19-year-old woman and a day he believes has never truly been explained. Thomas also makes an important distinction. He says he is not criticizing Meghan for seeking medical care as a young adult, nor does he argue that anyone owes the public details about private health matters. He says he respected her privacy then and still believes personal medical decisions should remain personal. Instead, Thomas says his concern is something entirely different. He believes a carefully managed public image gradually replaced the people who knew Meghan before worldwide fame. According to him, those closest to her became less visible, not because of anything they had done, but because they represented parts of her past that no longer fit the story presented to the public. He then points to several people connected to these events and asks why, in his opinion, so many have remained silent. He mentions Trevor Engelson, Samantha, the former nurse he calls Marina, and the clinic itself. Thomas believes each represents a different piece of the same timeline, though none has publicly provided a complete account. At the center of Thomas's version of events is his own role. He says he paid for Meghan's education, supported her early career, drove her to appointments, kept documents he believed were important, and stayed silent for more than 2 decades. According to Thomas, he watched as the public narrative evolved, while his own place in that story steadily disappeared. He says he is no longer expecting reconciliation. That hope, according to Thomas, faded years ago. What he wants now is much simpler. Thomas says he wants his perspective to exist alongside every other version of the story. He says he does not want to be remembered only as someone whose account was dismissed before people heard it. He acknowledges that many may see him as bitter, but asks whether bitterness alone proves someone is incorrect. According to Thomas, secrets kept for years do not simply disappear. He believes they remain in documents, memories, and records that survive long after the people involved have moved on. In his view, those unanswered questions continue to exist, waiting for someone willing to revisit them. Thomas says he is finished waiting for what he considers the right moment. He believes this is the time to share his account and let others decide what they think. If you found this story interesting, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe Thomas's account, or do you see it differently? We'd love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoy in-depth stories like this, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next upload.